Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres.
And I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres, and we both have homestead in Western North Carolina.
We've been talking a lot about gardening recently because it's that season, but we're going to mix it up a little bit today, talk about the basics of keeping chickens. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about your week, Mickayla.
This week has gone by in such a blur, almost. I had a hard time remembering what I did this week, which is not uncommon. I usually have to sit down and think about this. But we've been getting a lot of rain, nonstop rain every single day. And it keeps raining as soon as I'm done with work. So it will be nice for most of the day. And then as soon as I'm ready to go outside, it's like, nope, we're going to downpour, which is really fun. So I've been battling not only the rain itself, trying to work in the rain, but also the soil has been so muddy. I literally hurt my back almost dealing with muddy soil, I think 2 weeks ago. And I'm trying to take it a little bit easier because of that, because I have one bed left to till. And it's just pure mud, so I can't. It's literally soup. It's disgusting. But I did manage to get a bunch of our other beds prepped, and we got our beans, our bush beans planted. We have a few varieties of those. I got our lima beans planted and edamame, and then most of our melons. So I have a bed of melons that we're doing, and then I'm going to do them along our trellis, our big tunnel trellis too, just to, have more of them, because why not? I worked on cleaning up a huge pile of logs Taylor had cut up and split into firewood. I got those all stacked, and I moved our compost pile to a more confined location so that we can actually seed grass and clover where it was before, because it's on a hillside and it was starting to wash down the hill. We set up a little nursery. I'm calling it our little nursery, but it's just a tarped area in the garden that will be a garden bed next year. And we have all of our new stark trees on that. We got a bunch of new stark trees. I just mulched the chicken and the duck runs so that they're not muddy anymore from all the rain, because we got more free mulch. I found our first squash bugs yesterday, which I'm not happy about. I picked them up. And I fed them right to the ducks. I was like, here you go. This is yours. Please eat all of them. There will be more. And then the last thing that I did that was really not in my plans, we're working on getting the house cleaned up and whatnot, and just, it's a chaos week because we have guests coming at the end of the week, and I'm just trying to survive, get things planted, get ready for guests and everything. But of course, in true Mickayla fashion, I was like, I need another project. I'm not doing enough things. And so I decided that I'm going to start working on a documentary for the film fest next year, but also just because I think it would be fun to practice the specific camera styles of shooting the film. And so I decided that, right? I was like, okay, I'm going to do a documentary. And then now I currently have the scripts written out for a 5-part documentary.
I feel like you're the only person that I talk to who puts me to shame. I don't know. I do a lot, and then I talk to you and I'm like,
it's excessive, I know. I don't know how to stop it. It just happens. What did you do this week?
It's one of those weeks that I can't remember anything specific, so I know that I did a little bit of everything. But I did take some time off work just to get life stuff sorted. So, taking the pets to the vet, that sort of thing, because those obligations build up, especially in spring when you're running a homestead and working a full-time job and doing all the things. So I took 2 days off, and it did not feel like a long weekend. It felt like a normal weekend. But it has also been raining like crazy here. So even though I took time off, I've had a hard time finding time to still get into both of my gardens and plant stuff out. So I still feel behind. What's new? I got my order of new layer chicks this week. So the brooder is full of 20 something, mostly blue and green egg layers. And I combined the ram lambs that I've had down closer to the house with the older ewes today because they were kind of staying in what is intended to be part of my flower garden space for this year. So I was like, all right, I need to plant this, so I'm kicking you guys out, and they're mostly weaned now. So they moved to the pasture. Big day. They graduated. And everybody got along pretty good. So
Yay.
I don't know. I was kind of expecting to like need to supervise or like break something up, but they were all fairly chill with each other, which was good. I'm still relatively new to sheep, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect.
You have a whole flock now, all together.
I know. Yeah, there's 5 of them together now, and I was like, oh, this looks like a lot of sheep. Like it's one thing when there's 3 in one place and 2 in another. You're like, that's not that many. But I was like, that's a legitimate flock now. 5 sheep. It's a thing. And then, of course, just continuing to try to undo the damage from all the recent storms. A lot of my plants got damaged with hail, and a lot of them that didn't get damaged with hail got, flooded and drowned. And so I had to dig trenches in the lower half of my garden, backfill them with sand and gravel, and then put dirt back over the top. So I basically just made, French drains through half of my garden. So I finally got those covered back up so that those beds can get planted out, hopefully sooner than later. It's not just a giant excavation area. And threw some insect netting on my brassicas and on my squash because, like you said, the season for the pests is really beginning, and I'm about to get hit with a bunch of pest pressure. And those are the 2 that are the most susceptible. The things like broccoli and cauliflower and even kale, plus anything in the squash family.
Yeah.
Mostly I worry about vine borers. They can kind of fend for themselves against squash bugs more or less, but the vine borers will really kill them. And I also pulled my dahlias out that I stored from last year, and I was pleasantly surprised that out of the 60 or so that I saved, only like maybe 3 had issues, had rotted. And so I have a lot of dahlias now. I put them in trays to pre-sprout. I could just go ahead and put them in the ground, but I find that they do much better if I give them a head start on the grasshoppers and the slugs and things. So,
do you have a place for them? Like in the garden?
Yes. 2-ish of those raised beds that are in front of my house in my front yard are dahlias because I love dahlias. I have no problem dedicating a decent amount of garden space to dahlias. But yeah, despite how much I've been planting out, like every single day, my seed starting rack is still full because I just continue to pot things up and do things like pull the dahlias out and put them in trays. It's just keeps going.
Our entire tunnel in the garden is filled with plants that need to get planted out, and they're just like getting sadder by the day. And I'm like, I want to plant you, but I have so much else to do. So yeah. I might try and get up early and the next couple mornings and get some things planted because I will be so sad if they all just die out there and I don't even get them in the ground.
I always tell myself that tomorrow's the day that I get my stuff together and I get up early and I do all the things that are just lingering on my to-do list. And then it doesn't happen, and then that cycle repeats indefinitely forever.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I do all the things every single day, but there's too many things. Like I can't do them all. So,
Yeah.
you just reminded me though. We don't have them together full time, but this past weekend we put the chicks and the big chickens together for the first time, and we've had the electric net around our big chicken run, so they've been like on either side of a hardware cloth wall for a couple weeks, and we had zero issues. Like, fingers crossed that continues, but they were together for like 2 or 3 full days pretty much, besides nighttime. And there were no fights. They were just foraging and they all got along, and they're like almost the same size now, which is wild.
Well, on that topic, let's move on to actually talking about chickens for the next hour. There's a lot that we could talk about, but today we're going to focus on laying hens and, poultry that you can keep for eggs. That's what we're going to focus on today. We will talk about other poultry in other episodes because there's a lot of information to be discussed, but we can't talk about it all tonight.
So, just like we are going to wait to talk about other types of poultry in other episodes, we're also going to try and just stick to the basics of laying hens in this episode. We might try and do another one later on that's a little bit more in depth on specific points in here. So, if there's anything particular in this episode that you want more information on, let us know below. But we're going to just kind of give you a general overview of laying hens.
So we'll start with the basic needs. The very rudimentary what a chicken needs to survive. Obviously, food and water are a part of that. A good rule of thumb is that a chicken needs about a quarter pound of food per day. So that'll get you started figuring out, if you want this many chickens, how much food you're going to need in a week or a month or what have you. Water, it's pretty easy. You can go to Tractor Supply and just find the chicken waterers or ask an employee where the chicken waterers are. They'll point you to it. I have 20-ish laying hens, and in the summer they'll go through a couple gallons of water in a day if it's hot. So choose whatever size water you think is appropriate, and you can always adjust from there if you feel like it's not what you need. Another basic thing is a coop with a roost for them to sleep at night and also a place for them to lay. Typically, it's going to be nesting boxes, but you can get real scrappy with it if you want to. They don't have to have fancy boxes. But they will also need some sort of run or free range situation with some degree of protection from predators, where they can roam during the day and do their thing, forage, go, be chickens, however you want them to be chickens, and be aware that they can fly. So if you have them in a run that isn't completely covered, then I like to have my fencing at least 4 feet tall. My chickens do still fly over that when they're determined. So if you really, really want to contain them, maybe consider covering it, just so you know. Calcium supplement is also going to be a basic thing if you have laying hens. When they lay an egg, the shell is made out of calcium, and so that is something that they do need. But some bonus, still call them needs if you want to get a little fancier with it. Dust baths are a big thing. That's how they keep themselves clean, and so that's, a combination of dirt and or diatomaceous earth, wood ash, that kind of stuff. If you've ever seen a hamster give themselves a dust bath, or like a chinchilla or something, it's very similar. It looks kind of weird. They just basically flop around in the dirt and get that stuff all up under their feathers. But it does help them keep healthy and help them keep clean. And another bonus would be grit. Basically just really small rocks. They sell poultry grit at feed stores, and that just helps them digest their food a little bit better.
So we have dust baths in just old tires that we found on the property. Since you move your hens around, do you provide dust baths, or do you just let them make their own in the dirt? Because mine will do both.
I don't give them dust baths. I let them do their thing, and I do move them around. So, for lack of a better term, I'll call them paddocks.
Mhm.
So I have, fairly routine paddocks, and I know that when I put them in a particular area, that they're going to use, this spot that's torn up as a dust bath. Or on occasion, in the evenings when it's close to their bedtime, and I know that they're not going to wreak havoc on anything if they only have, an hour to free range roam around the property, do what they're going to do. I'll let them out, and they like to use the very, very dry dirt that's under my porch because it never gets wet. They love to use that as a dust bath. So, they have their spots that are their favorites that they return to and that they know that they use on occasion. But yeah, because I have a mobile setup for my layers, I on top of everything else that I have to move, I have not added dust bath to that list.
Honestly, ours use theirs a lot, and I think we could probably put more in there because they use them so much, but they will pack themselves into the tires and then they get mad that they're crowded, so they'll just go make another dust bath on the ground near the edge of the run. So I think if you provide them with one or not, they're probably still going to do it on the ground too, just because that's their nature. Just because I like to get a little fancy with it sometimes and I like to spoil my chickens, we will put diatomaceous earth in there. We will put wood ash in there. And that's just like, any ash left over from your campfire or intentionally like burning to make ash for them, or if you're clearing things on your property, that really helps with the dustiness factor, especially with how wet it is here. Like adding the wood ash will help a lot. We add construction sand to them, and then you could also just find dirt from your property and like let it dry out in there, and they'll use it. They'll use our clay dirt too. And then sometimes I will also put dried herbs. If I have excess herbs in there, they really like to have like lavender or thyme, rosemary, those kinds of things. And it helps with the smell of just chickens in general. They don't necessarily stink, but they have a scent to them, in my opinion. And I like the herbs smell better.
Especially when they get wet. Kind of in the same
Mm-hmm.
way that like a wet dog smells like a wet dog. A wet
Yeah.
chicken smells like a wet chicken.
Yes, exactly. Um, and then for you mentioned the calcium supplement. So just to go a little bit more in depth on that, you can use oyster shell, which is really cheap to buy. The bags are really heavy. But they last a really long time. We've bought one bag and it's still like half, we still have probably half of the bag left. We just poured it into a 5-gallon bucket. We keep it out there and we give it to them whenever they're out. And we also will occasionally feed their eggshells back to them. You don't have to bake them, but I do bake them for like 10 minutes just because they're easier to crunch up that way. And I can disperse them better so that more of them can get to them at a time because they'll fight over them if I don't. Is there anything else that you can think of that's good for that?
No, for me, it's primarily, the oyster shells that they sell at the feed stores and then the eggshells. I will only bake mine if they're from different chickens. Like if it's from that flock, I don't worry about it because it's basically like a sanitization thing
Yeah.
is the ultimate goal of baking it. So if I haven't gotten eggs from my chickens for some reason and a friend gives me some, I would be careful feeding them back. But yeah, for my eggshells, I normally just let them dry on the counter. And then I have like a really big mason jar that I put them into and I just sort of crunch them down until it's full. And then I go feed it to them. They love it.
I only bake them because it's easier to like pulse them or whatever in the food processor, and then I just go dump them out there. But it just dries out the stickiness of them. They're the membrane in them, and they crunch up easily. So that's why I do it. I am not opposed. You're not technically supposed to do this. I am not opposed to like if they crack an egg or something out there, I will just take it out and immediately chuck it on the ground in there, and so it splatters everywhere, and they love it. People say that makes them eat eggs like as they lay them. I haven't really had that much of an issue with it. It's only when they fall and crack, then they all get really excited about it because it's like the white and the yolk are exposed. It's not just the shell is cracked.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it teaches them to eat eggs. I think that's an instinct that they have because if they didn't have that instinct, then if eggs cracked, it would attract predators and
Yeah.
it would attract the things that you don't want, searching out eggs like snakes and whatever else. So I think that's actually a good instinct on them. And yeah, if an egg cracks, I will either feed it to them there or I'll put it on one of the dog's food because the dogs really like it too.
That kind of leads well into the next portion of this. What do they eat? I've actually heard that if they're eating eggs, it could be because they're deficient, they're not getting enough of something, whether it's protein or calcium. So if your chickens are consistently eating eggs, maybe look into supplementing their feed a little bit more or something like that. But like you said at the beginning, they should be getting about a quarter pound of food per day.
So obviously, chickens will mostly eat the chicken food that you are feeding to them. It's going to be different depending on if you have, baby chickens or adult chickens. So from chicks up until they start laying, I will feed them what's called, a grower feed. It's a little bit higher in protein and it's intended for young chickens because they need a little bit higher protein when they're growing than when they're an adult. And then once they start laying is when I switch them over to layer feed, which is a little bit lower protein. The difference is like 2%. I think grower is like 18 and then layers like typically 16. It's not a huge difference, but just to keep them healthy, that is what they need. And so you want to look for those words or those labels when you are finding your feed, just depending on what chickens you have. And then the laying ration or the layer feed will typically also have some calcium supplement in it, but it's important to know that that's not necessarily enough to meet their dietary need for calcium when they're laying. They still need more. They still need those, recycled eggshells or that additional oyster shell to meet what their body needs to keep laying eggs.
And that's kind of something where you can provide it to them, and if they need it, they will eat it, but they're not going to like overdose on it. Like if they don't need it, if they've gotten enough, they'll just leave it until they do. That's something you don't have to feed them every day with their food. It should last a little while if you give them like a tray of it or something.
Mine tend to spill it. So sometimes I get irritated at them. But yes, that's a good point. It's not something that you necessarily want to mix into their food. You want it to be a separate feeder, a separate dish, separate bowl, separate somehow so that they can eat it when and if they need it and then leave it when and if they don't.
Yeah, ours will use it as a dust bath because we have them in plant trays. We just feed them all in like the 10 by 20 trays, and they like to flop around in it sometimes, and they fling it everywhere. But I'm not moving ours every week or whatever, so they can find it if they need it. If you're moving your chickens, if you have a mobile coop, or if you have free range hens, or if you just let them out to explore occasionally, they also will eat bugs and grass, and they'll eat your garden if you are not careful. So make sure you're not letting them into your garden, especially if you have like young seedlings and things like that out there. But if you have them out on grass and not just in a confined run, they will be able to supplement their food with grass, plants, seeds from plants, bugs, whatever they can find really. They'll just eat anything. They're little snacky dinosaurs. They like food no matter what it is. And then if you are the kind of person who saves their food scraps for like a compost bin or something, I save pretty much all of our scraps. I usually try and separate them into bowls, some to give to the chickens and some to put in the compost pile. If they don't enjoy eating it, they'll at least enjoy scratching through it and pecking around in it, because I don't know, that's just what they do. They like to scratch things, they like to peck around, they like to explore. And then usually that will bring some bugs and stuff, so they'll get those too. Some things you don't want to feed them, however, are avocado seed. I think avocado itself is safe, but I think the seed and the skin is not safe.
I don't know. I'm not someone who enjoys avocado, so I never have avocado, so I don't really have the occasion to know this.
Let me look
But
it up really quick.
I assume that it was the flesh too, because I know that, for example, you can't feed dogs avocado. It does something to their liver, I think.
Okay, so it says the flesh of an avocado is safe for chickens to eat in small quantities, but the skin and pit are toxic to them. Okay, so you can feed avocado flesh to your chickens in small amounts. Don't feed them the skin, don't feed them the seeds. It can kill them in large enough quantities. You don't want to feed them raw beans. You don't want to feed them coffee grounds, chocolate, and please don't feed them anything moldy. If it's sitting in your compost bowl on your porch, like mine does occasionally for a few days, and it gets moldy, just put it in your compost pile, let it do its thing. You don't want to introduce that to them because they will still peck through it, and I don't know, that just seems risky in my opinion. I also don't feed mine onion and garlic. Just to be safe, like skins and everything, I keep those separate. I keep those with my coffee grounds and things that I know that they don't really like to eat.
Yeah, I mean, I use garlic with my chickens as, an immune booster. Um, I'm sure, like anything else, if they have too much of anything, it's not good for them. But generally, you hear people say, don't feed onion and garlic to your chickens, not because it's toxic to them, but because some people say that it makes your eggs taste like onion and garlic. And in some cases, that could be great. It's just pre-seasoned. But if you're, using them in a cake or something, you might not want your cake to taste like onions. So it's understandable.
Yeah.
I don't think about it too much with my chickens, honestly. I don't typically feed them kitchen scraps. I usually feed them garden scraps. And yeah, I don't do too much brain damage. There are things that I won't feed them, like coffee grounds or chocolate or something. And I am kind of careful about what I give them, but I also kind of trust them to have some degree of instincts that if I do accidentally give something to them that's not good for them, like maybe they should know to avoid that. Kind of like their toxic plants grow in my pasture on occasion, and I kind of have to trust the sheep to only eat them in very, very small quantities to be medicinal, or just be smart enough to not munch on that.
So will you give them nightshade plants, like the greens from those, or do you avoid that?
Ooh, that's a good topic. No, I will not give any of my animals nightshade greens. I mean, nightshade greens are even, bad for humans. Like
Yep.
tomato leaves, things like that, are just generally toxic to animals. And so I am careful if I'm putting them in a garden space that's, at the end of its lifespan and it has old tomato plants. I am careful about that stuff.
Something else you're not supposed to give them is apple seeds, technically. But kind of like you said, I trust them to like kind of know not to eat those. So when we got our many bushels of apples and pressed them for cider, and then we made apple cider or apple scrap vinegar out of that, we gave them the scraps afterwards. We also gave them a bunch of fresh scraps too. And we didn't pick the seeds out, and they didn't, like, nothing bad happened. So I think that they kind of know, they have instincts about that kind of stuff.
Is that
That's
for arsenic? What is the concern there?
It's cyanide.
Really?
You can kill
Interesting.
them.
Okay. If you are new to chickens, you're wanting to get some chickens, but you're not sure where or how to do such a thing, let's talk about that for a minute. There are a few different ways you can get chickens. You can get adult or teenager chickens. If you want them already laying or really close to laying, if you want to have a little bit more fun with it and you can be patient about it, you can pick up some chicks, which is very cute. You can raise them up from chicks if you want to, or you could even, get eggs and hatch your own. If you do already have chickens and you're looking to get more chickens, you might be able to do something like let one of your hens go broody and let them hatch them for you. But if you don't already have chickens, then you would need something like an incubator to hatch them from eggs. I've never done the whole incubator egg thing. I always just order my chicks from a hatchery. But when I first got here, I did go ahead and just buy some adult chickens so that I could have eggs as soon as possible.
So, do you have a reasoning why you order them from the hatchery instead of hatching your own?
It's just more stuff to worry about. I mean, so when I hatched, there was 1 year, first year I was here, I did let a hen go broody and hatch them out. When you do that, you can't select for gender. So I ended up with 3 roosters and 1 hen, and that's just a headache to deal with. Relocating or selling roosters or harvesting them is, for me, more trouble than it's worth.
Yep. Okay, that's exactly what I thought you were going to say. That's why we ordered ours online too, and we still got 2 extra roosters in there, even though they sex them. They're supposed to, be able to try and tell the gender of them, the sex of them. And even at Tractor Supply, we got a rooster, and they were supposed to be like the pullets. So it's never going to be like 100%, but when you're hatching your own eggs, it's a 50-50 chance. And I feel like when you buy them from a hatchery or like a local farm store or something, there's probably like an 80-20 chance you'll get what you want, or like a 90-10 maybe if you're really lucky.
Another thing to consider if you are ordering, chicks versus getting hens, or if they're juveniles, you have more, variety and control over what kind of chickens you're getting if you order them as chicks, because, hatcheries have all kinds of stuff. But if you want to basically be at the mercy of whatever someone else happens to have raised, your selection is going to be a little thinner. So if you know that you want a particular breed of chicken and maybe it's not super popular, you might be better going the raising them from chicks route. Granted, again, you're going to have to be a little more patient, and you're going to have to, invest in more equipment than you would need otherwise. They need a brooder to stay in for 6 to 8 weeks. And they're going to need just a little bit more protection because they are small, they are vulnerable, until they get to be like 5-6 months old and start laying.
Like our friend Kathleen last week, she has 4 or 5 chickens, and the reason for that is because she knew exactly how many eggs she needs. She didn't want too many, and she didn't want to go overboard with it. I don't know anybody who goes overboard with chickens.
What?
But and she had specific breeds that she was getting. So some breeds will lay more eggs, some breeds lay less eggs, and you can find lists all over the place for telling you which hens are gonna lay the most eggs. On the hatchery websites, usually with the breeds, if you're looking at different breeds, they will tell you roughly how many eggs they'll lay. In their first year of laying, I think that's when hens usually lay the most eggs, like once they really get going, and then it kind of tapers off throughout their life after that. So like 1 to 2-year-old chickens are gonna lay the most eggs, and then it will slowly reduce. So that's why people often will kind of freshen up their flock. They'll add chicks every year, every couple years to keep that egg production up. After they get going with laying, they're going to lay based on the amount of sunlight they get. So in the springtime, you're going to be getting a lot more eggs than you're going to be getting in the winter, just because there's a lot less daylight hours in the winter. The lighting really affects how they lay, and some people will add lights, like artificial lighting, to their coops to keep that egg production up, but I personally don't do that because I think that their bodies need that break, and I would much rather let them have that break. It just feels more natural to me. You're going to have a range of chickens who lay anywhere from like 150 or more eggs to 300 plus eggs. It's a big range. Some of them lay a lot. Some of them lay, half the days in a year. But on average, hens will lay 3 to 4 eggs a week. And again, that really just depends on the breed.
So if you're someone who is looking to replace, for example, your dozen eggs that you would typically buy at the grocery store, if that's your goal to replace in a week, then you might keep 4 chickens. Now, some weeks you might end up with a dozen eggs, some weeks you might end up with 16 eggs. There's not really a way to control, landing exactly on the dot. But, you have a few more. Oh no, how terrible. You get a little extra eggs. No big deal there. But something to consider is, these are animals and sometimes things just happen. So if you really want to make sure that you stay above a certain level, maybe you might consider keeping 1 or 2 extra chickens just as a buffer, just in case something happens and you don't want to have to then, raise another batch of chicks in order to get, just replace your 1 or 2 chickens, or you don't want to have to drop $40 to $60 to replace 2 chickens. I don't think it's a bad idea, but if you have limited space, you might be constrained to whatever you can fit, and maybe you don't have room for extras. And some examples of the best layers, the chickens that are going to give you the most eggs per year, those are going to be things like white leghorns, Rhode Island Reds, sex-linked chickens, Red Star, Black Star. Is it pronounced Isa Brown? I've never heard
I
anybody say it. I've only seen it
I
spelled.
always call it ISA brown.
Versus some of we'll call them the worst layers. It's a harsh title, but those are going to be things like your silkies and your frizzles, really the chickens that were bred, not necessarily for egg production, but because they look really fun, they have value other than the eggs that they lay.
I've heard silkies are really great, like pet chickens. I've never had one, I've never seen one in person, but I've seen pictures and they're so cute. I feel like they would not be good for our homestead because it's so muddy and they have fuzzy little bodies, and I feel like they just get caked with mud, just like our Brahmas. Not that that's necessarily a health issue, but we're gonna go through some potential health issues that can happen. Like you just said, Sage, things happen, and sometimes it's not your fault. But we're gonna try and give you a quick rundown on some of the more popular things that happen with chickens. So if it sounds like we're giving you a lot of information right now, just kind of take it slow. Don't let us overwhelm you. We're just trying to get this information out there, and apologies in advance if it makes you feel overwhelmed, but all of these things can be dealt with, so don't be afraid of that. Some of the main issues you could possibly deal with your chickens are lice and mites, worms and parasites, and respiratory issues. With lice and mites, it's kind of easy to tell if this is happening, but also it could be misconstrued as some of the other things that happen. So if you notice these things, there's probably something going on. So just, look into all of the possibilities. For lice and mites, if you notice that they're pulling their own feathers and they have bald spots, that's a sign. And also there will be sometimes there's little black spots around their eyelids, and those are little mites, and you can kind of see them. That's not always the case, but that's definitely a sign. A way that you can prevent this is adding diatomaceous earth to their run, their coop, their nesting boxes in general. Treating it if you do notice that they have them. Again, the dust baths and diatomaceous earth aren't just a fun thing. Dust baths serve a real purpose for them, and that actually helps them keep the mites and whatnot away. Diatomaceous earth, the way it works is it kind of makes tiny little cuts into bugs with exoskeletons, and it makes them dry out and die. You can also make a garlic, this sounds so silly to say, a garlic infused spray and pull their wings out, not pull them out, just pull them apart from their body and spritz it in there, and that kind of deals with the lice and mites as well.
And then for worms and parasites, the symptoms for that is going to be, obviously if you see worms in their manure, it's a pretty good sign. Things like diarrhea or really pale egg yolks. That might indicate that you are dealing with some internal parasites. To prevent this, like we just talked about with the diatomaceous earth, you can keep that around their run, you can keep that in their nesting boxes, that should help. Also, just, semi-regular doses of apple cider vinegar, garlic in their water. That's never really going to hurt them. It's only ever going to boost their immune system a little bit to help them deal with things. You can also add hot peppers or hot pepper flakes to their food. I grow cayenne peppers to feed to my chickens for this purpose. But if you aren't aiming for prevention, if you notice that there's an issue and you're trying to treat it, then pumpkin seeds are, in theory, a good way to deworm. I do feed my chickens pumpkin seeds, but if I ever really noticed a real issue, I would go pick up a store-bought dewormer and dose the flock with that.
So you kind of use pumpkin seeds as a preventative.
I enjoy growing pumpkins. I don't necessarily enjoy eating pumpkins, and so it's kind of like I get to grow my weird collection of pumpkins, and then the chickens get food through the winter, and if it so happens that it deworms them, fantastic.
Okay, and then respiratory issues are the kind of last common thing that we're going to go into. And obviously symptoms of that will be sneezing, wheezing, just like, I don't know, I feel like you can tell when something's a respiratory issue. Our chickens sneeze when I give them dry feed instead of soaked feed because it gets a little bit dusty. So make sure you're not like mistaking something like that for a potential bigger issue. Something you also want to consider is if you're bringing new chicks or chickens into your flock, you might notice some of this respiratory, sneezing, wheezing, etc., simply because their immune systems are trying to adjust to new birds. That's more of an adjustment period, not necessarily like a full-on illness. So again, note that. If you want to prevent respiratory issues, just make sure you're keeping your coop clean and trying to reduce any stress or prevent any stress on them that really doesn't need to be there. So if your roosters are overmating them or there's fighting going on, somebody's being picked on, just general things that stress them out. And then another really big thing is not to use cedar bedding. Cedar bedding is very dusty and it really irritates their airways. Respiratory issues can be a little bit more serious and they could merit a vet visit if it's very extreme. But you can also try and boost their immune systems with, again, apple cider vinegar, garlic, oregano, things like that, added to their water, added to their dust baths or their runs in general so that they have access to those. But if you do notice that one of your chickens is sick, you're going to want to isolate it, put it in a dog crate in your basement like I do. Or, just find somewhere that it can be alone and safe so you're not spreading any respiratory issues to the rest of your flock, and also so that you can let that hen heal and keep an eye on it, and you're going to want to be checking on that thing often.
And if you have a sick chicken but you're not quite sure what's going on, I've been in that scenario. My general tactic is, one, quarantine it, right? Get it away from the rest of the flock so that it doesn't spread. But oregano is a really good medicinal herb, whether you're a human or a chicken. Adding that to food can genuinely help with various infections. It's not something that's going to hurt. Overdose. You can't really overdose on oregano. It's not going to hurt a healthy chicken. It's not going to hurt if, the oregano isn't something that can treat whatever's going on with that chicken. It's only going to potentially help. So I don't feel bad about throwing that at my sick chickens when they have something going on. Apple cider vinegar in their water is also another great thing that seems to be almost a cure-all. And then garlic, again, works for humans too, right? I eat a bunch of garlic when I'm sick. And so I will also crush up garlic and put that in the chicken's water if they're sick. So if you're not sure, and you're not at the point of taking them to the vet, give them some water with apple cider vinegar and garlic in it, and then put some oregano in their food. It's probably going to work.
I don't want to go into like a lot of depth on these things, but I just feel like it would be smart to go through some of the issues we've encountered that are different than those top 3 that we just kind of dove into, because there are a lot of things that can happen, and I haven't even owned my birds for a year yet, and I've had almost everything on this entire list. So I'm going to start with pasty butt because that's a thing that chicks usually deal with. There are a lot of reasons that they might get it, but a lot of the time it can be caused by the temperature being off in there. I just literally take my chicks, I hold them kind of like sideways, I run their butt under like lukewarm water and use a wet Q-tip and just like gently coax it off. You want to be really careful with that. I've dealt with broken toes caused by me because I fell down a hill and broke my chicken's toe. I feel so bad about that still. Our rooster's overmating, and that has caused like the wings on our hens, basically the feathers are gone and they're like bare skin, so we've had to put saddles on them, and then their wings are still having issues even with trying to mitigate that. They'll pick at each other if they have exposed skin, if they notice that their skin is red. We have had one chicken who pretty much had no skin left on her back. It was open flesh, and she's okay now. We had to wrap her in vet wrap and like keep an eye on her for quite a while. She was inside for 2 or 3 weeks. I've not had egg binding happen yet. We just had one chicken pass away for absolutely no reason. Like, she was lethargic one night, sleeping in a nesting box, and the next morning she was dead. I don't know what it was. We thought it was Merrick's disease presenting like later on than we realized, but they're all vaccinated for it and it shouldn't be a thing. We cleaned the coop as if it were, and everyone else has been fine. So I have no clue what happened there.
Again, sometimes things just happen. My list is shorter. I don't know. You angered the chicken gods. I don't know what you've done. But
my ducks are also chaos.
It's true. Sorry. The crossover chicken and duck, the poultry god has some beef with you for one reason or another. But no, I've still had plenty of issues with my chickens. I've also had pasty butt in some of my chicks. I notice that it's more of an issue when I feed what I consider to be lower quality feed. I have less of a problem with it when I get the feed that I like from the feed store that's from, a Kentucky farm, and I don't know. I think it's all around better. But
I noticed it a lot more in our Tractor Supply chicks than our hatchery chicks.
Yep.
So I don't know if it has something to do with that either, but just an observation.
I notice it when I feed Tractor Supply feed. So I'm sure that they're feeding Tractor Supply feed at Tractor Supply. But anyway, I have also had issues with roosters overmating and have corrected that since. I have dealt with, on more than one occasion, prolapsed vents, which is basically where their organs just fall outside of their bodies. Not great, not easy to fix, not easy to treat. And it's only ever happened specifically with my whiting chickens. So I have whiting true blues and whiting true greens. And I've never had it with any other breed, but it can happen when they start laying too much too young, which that's a breed that lays a lot when they're young. And so that's my hypothesis. And then I have also had a chicken that died for no reason. Just found it, looked like it went to sleep peacefully and never woke back up.
How do you treat the prolapse vent? I've never had to deal with that yet.
So, it's not a fun process. It's about as gross as you would imagine. But what they say is to make some, what do they call it? I think they call it something like glycine solution. It's sugar water. It's simple syrup. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar, kitchen sugar, and water. For whatever reason, I do not know the science behind it, but I've researched it a lot. The sugar is supposed to reduce the inflammation, and then you glove up and you push it back in where it's supposed to be, and you hold it. You hold it there for as long as you can stomach holding it there. And eventually you let go. Hopefully you put them in a low light situation that's going to discourage them from laying an egg, because if they lay an egg in the near future, it's just gonna re-irritate that issue all over again. And usually you're gonna have to do it more than once, because it's one of those things that once it happens one time, it's really prone to recur. So, not a fun thing to deal with.
So the chicks that you just got, are they whitings? Because you said they were blue and green layers. Are they something else?
Yes. They are whiting true blues, whiting true greens. I'm gonna give that breed one more shot. I think in my first batch of chickens, in my new chicken raising ignorance, there's a chance that I may have like stunted their growth a little bit, which could be a reason that with more egg laying, like they're tiny chickens to begin with, like they don't look like they would lay that much. But yeah, I'm gonna be extra cautious with these guys and give them everything I can think to give them to grow well. And if I continue to have issues, then obviously I'm not gonna continue to get that breed.
Interesting. I've never had to deal with that yet. I was gonna get whitings, and then they were out of stock the first time we tried to order them, so I didn't get them. But maybe that's a good thing. I have a list of first aid that I kind of keep on hand because we've dealt with so much stuff. We will always and forever have vet wrap and gauze because we've used that so many times for so many things at this point. Blue coat and hen healer are things that I use often. Blue coat is basically an iodine spray that is tinted blue because chickens are attracted to the color red. So if they see something bleeding or if they see bare pink skin, they're going to pick at it, go after it because it's that color. And so the blue color is supposed to kind of deter them from that. I don't necessarily know how well that works. We haven't had any issues with them continuing to pick at things that are blue coated, but that's the science behind it, apparently. Hen healer is like, it smells like A&D ointment, if you know what that is, and it's blue. So A&D ointment is like when you get I don't know if tattoos, but when you get like a piercing to kind of keep it like lubricated so it doesn't dry out and get gross, that's what you use that for. And it smells the same as hen healer, but the hen healer is, my analogies are just really funny right now. You know Scooby-Doo fruit snacks that we had as a child? The bright blue colored ones?
I did not get fun things like Scooby-Doo whatever snacks. So I have no idea what you're talking about because I did not have that kind of childhood.
So we put that on marmalade when her back was skinned, basically, and we just like coated her in that, and that really, really helped. I've heard people also use colloidal silver for that and for other illnesses and like skin wounds, and that's supposed to do similar things as the hen healer. I just did the hen healer because that's what Tractor Supply had, and I didn't know where to get colloidal silver, and I don't keep that on hand at the moment. And then Epsom salt is the thing I use the most. Epsom salt has been a major go-to. So I've had to soak hens in that. I've had to soak ducks in that. That's basically a way to reduce inflammation. I don't know. That's like the catch-all. Like soak them in a bath of Epsom salt for 20 minutes or whatever, and they'll be good. Something that we don't really do at the moment, but I want to start doing, is adding red pepper flakes to their food. We do add ACV, apple cider vinegar, to their water just to keep their immune systems up. Then, like we mentioned earlier, the pumpkin seeds, garlic spray, diatomaceous earth, all that kind of stuff is great to keep kind of like a bulk amount on hand because you're using it often. And I mean, like pumpkin seeds, if you're feeding them pumpkins, that's probably, not something that you need to keep stocked, but you can also buy pumpkin seeds in like bags. So that would be my list of like first aid type of things. I'm curious if anybody else has stuff that they'd add to that, though. Let us know in a comment below.
Yeah, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff you can keep on hand. I feel like for my chickens, I just keep apple cider vinegar, garlic, which I have anyway, just for cooking, oregano, pumpkin seeds, whatever. And I have other just like general things that you put on, open wounds just to keep them from getting infected. That's safe for dogs and sheep and everything else that I have. And I don't know what it's called. I think it's Vetricin something.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just like my general animal. If something happened, put it on there. I don't have a super extensive first aid kit for chickens.
We have like a little tub, like a little tote that we keep with their feed and whatnot that's got that kind of stuff in it. We also keep a diluted antibacterial spray in there that we use for the cats and the birds if we need it. But it's kind of like our pet first aid. But yeah, Vetericin is I've never used it, but I see it recommended whenever I'm frantically searching for what to do for various things.
Now let's talk about some common misconceptions. Let's debunk some myths about chickens. First, you do not need a rooster for your hens to lay eggs. I still have roosters in with my laying hens. They do add value, but you don't need them in order to make your hens lay eggs.
Roosters only crow in the morning? My roosters crow all day.
I will hear my roosters crowing at night. So they'll crow if they hear something around that, sounds suspicious, to kind of be like, "Hey, I'm here. I'm gonna mess you up if you come try to mess with us." My roosters and then my neighbors' roosters will have crowing competitions. It's like kind of just a like show offy thing. And so they'll just like ping pong back and forth just because what else do they really have to do other than eat bugs and crow? So yeah, it's definitely not just a morning alarm kind of thing.
My roosters will compete with each other, and they always do it when we're trying to film a video out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like never fails. It's one after the other constantly. They do it if we're in the run bothering them, and it's like they're annoyed that we're in there. They'll keep crowing. They'll crow all day long.
Different color eggs aren't different colors because they taste different. They're different colors purely because of the breed. Absolutely no other reason. It is the genetics of the chicken that determines the eggshell color. A blue egg doesn't taste any different from a white egg, doesn't taste any different from a brown egg, unless those chickens are in different environments eating different things.
I also think that this might be caused by some marketing or just like historically thinking about it. I feel like there's a common misconception that brown eggs are healthier than white eggs because the white eggs are what you buy at the store and the brown eggs are what you get from a farm. I have all sorts of eggs. They're all different colors.
I totally used to think that. Before I kept chickens, I didn't grow up in any of this. I used to think that brown eggs were because, the chickens were free range or healthier or whatever, and that white eggs meant that they were like caged, unhealthy, unhappy chickens. But, I fell victim to it too. I'm part of it. And chickens also don't lay every day. Like we said earlier, chickens lay on average 3 to 4 eggs a week, which means that it's closer to every other day than it is every day. And if it's winter, they might not be laying at all.
The eggs at the store are on average at least a month old. They are not fresh. So the eggs that you get from friends, farms, or homesteads or whatever, those are going to probably be able to keep for significantly longer than the eggs that you get at the store because those eggs at the store have already been kept for quite a while.
Yeah, what's the average age of eggs that you would get at the store? I think the statistic that I've seen thrown around, whether it's accurate or not, different story. But, you think about between the time that the chicken lays the egg, they collect it, they process it, they distribute it, and then it gets on the grocery shelf. 2 months isn't an unordinary amount of time to pass between those things.
So it says, just to clarify this. It says farmers have up to 30 days to go from when the egg is laid to the carton. And that means most supermarket eggs can be 2 months old by the time you buy them.
If you're keeping your own chickens, you may have heard that you need to wash and refrigerate your eggs right away. It's one thing if you are keeping them, selling your extras for other people. You have certain responsibilities if you are sharing them or selling them. That's different. And it's going to depend on the laws where you live. But if you're just keeping chickens and these are eggs for your own consumption, you can actually leave the eggs unwashed. You can leave them on the counter. That's how I eat my eggs. I don't store them in the refrigerator unless I know that I'm going to need to keep them for a longer period of time for whatever reason. And I don't go out of my way to wash them immediately. I have my little egg tray thing that's on my counter that's always room temperature, and that's where I pull my eggs from.
Chickens are vegetarian.
Yeah, okay.
So if you let a chicken out to free range or put them on grass, the first thing that they're going to go for is any bug they can find. They'll go for the grass and stuff too, but they're looking for bugs right away. Like they want the bugs. They're bugivores.
Right. And I mean, it doesn't happen often in, our scenarios, but they will also go for meat scraps. I've I've had occasions where someone's given me venison and then there's, scraps associated with that and they eat that. It's not bad for them, in nature if they came across something that died relatively recently and maybe the bear or the wolf or whatever had the meat that it wanted and moved on, they would pick that carcass clean. That's their ecological niche, is to go find these bugs and these scraps and scavenge in that way.
I've also heard stories, I've never had this happen to me. I've also heard stories that they'll eat small snakes and rats or mice. Ew. But good for them.
Also, chickens can definitely fly. They can't, fly in the same way that maybe a crow or a pigeon or whatever can, but they can get some air to them.
So how you kind of combat that, and I've not had to do this yet, but I've seen people do it, is clipping their wings. It's often said that it is mean or it hurts them, but it's just like clipping your nails. It doesn't hurt them.
Like you can cut them too short. Is there a way to hurt them when you're clipping their wings? Yes, but inherently just clipping their wings just means trimming their feathers. It's like a haircut. It's like trimming your nails. It does not hurt them. And they don't all sound the same. They don't all make the same noise. They have very specific sounds for very specific things. The first one that comes to mind is the I laid an egg sound. Very distinct, and it's very loud.
It is. That's the only one I can hear inside our house. I can't even hear our roosters usually inside the house, unless I'm like almost at that end of the house. I can hear their egg calls from my office where I'm sitting right now, and this is on the opposite side of the house. They're so loud. It's really cute though. They get so excited. Even just like the different birds, at least I noticed this, my hens, they make different little coo noises and like their little purrs and stuff. Their voices sound different from each other. Like my Americanas, their voices are distinctly different from the Bielefelders or something. Like they have very different voices. And I don't know if it has to do with size or just like the breed, but it's really cute to see the differences in them to me. So those are kind of some myths that we were trying to debunk, but now we're going to go over some fun facts, some things you should know. This is going to be sort of a similar list style. To start off with, chickens establish a pecking order. So they have a head honcho, and then they have all of the other chickens. They have their little order. Who's boss? Usually it's the rooster. But at least in my flock, I noticed that some of the hens are even more dominant than others.
Oh yeah, and if you don't have a rooster, a hen will typically occupy that spot. And, even within each other, like there's a bottom, like last place, and there's a runner up, and there's, everywhere in between. And it's interesting. I notice it when they're going to bed and when they are, trying to all get around the feed tray. You notice who is the boss over who, and who has first dibs to the best feed spot, who doesn't.
For sure.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it is difficult in my experience, at least, and also sometimes unhealthy for the hens to keep multiple roosters in the same flock. I made this mistake first year, 100%. I had too many roosters for my hens, and they ended up losing feathers. They ended up starting to get injured, and I fixed it as quickly as I could. But some of them are even now still trying to grow back their feathers. So be aware. I don't know. When I was researching it, I came across things that said, so long as you have 5 hens to 1 rooster, you could be okay, especially if they've been raised together. And that just did not work for me. Even 1 rooster to 20 hens, I find that, you still see on the back of their head, like the rooster's been doing its job.
Something else that you might have to deal with is the fact that eggs sitting out in your nesting boxes might attract snakes. I have not had to deal with this yet. I do know we have the snakes that primarily go after the eggs, and those are rat snakes on our property. And I've seen a lot of them. That's the only kind of snake I've seen that's like a large snake that could eat an egg. So I'm hoping we don't have issues with that this year, but they definitely attract the snakes and also just other predators. Like we have opossum and skunks and stuff too that hang around, and I know it's because we've got our compost pile in that area.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind before you just, nonchalantly reach your hand into a nesting box. I check every single time before, I have mine in milk crates basically, and I pull the milk crate out to get to the eggs. But I look and I'm like, okay, is there anything there that's not supposed to be there? And sometimes you won't even see the snake. Sometimes you'll just notice like, hey, I have, 2 or 3 fewer eggs than I normally do. There used to be a black rat snake that would get into one of my coops specifically and steal those eggs. Had to kick him out a few times, and then he went after my chicks, my poults one day, and that was the end of his permission to stay here. Something handy to know is that either keeping a rooster or 1 or more black hens can deter hawks. The black hens can get mistaken by the hawk as crows, and crows will chase hawks off. That's what happens on my property. I don't mind the crows that hang around. Yes, they steal some feed here and there, but they consistently chase the hawk off, who has established this as their territory. And then just having a rooster in general is going to help with any sort of aerial predators or even some ground predators.
So we have a roof on our run. We have chicken wire on the ceiling of the run to protect them from hawks. But now that we have the electric netting that we've been letting them out into, I've been a little bit more concerned about it. We do have a lot of hawks here. They haven't tried to go after our ducks yet. The ducks are very aware of them, but the chickens haven't really had exposure to that, so I'm curious to see how that goes. But I think with the rooster, and we also have a few black chickens, I think that we should be okay. But other predators like raccoons, bears, if you've got them, possums, we have skunks, that's one of our main predators here. Cats, like Ricky, he's always trying to get to my chickens. They're going to be constantly trying to get into your run and coop if you give them easy access to it. So for us, we have our compost pile right near our coop, which is not ideal, but that's like the ideal location for it for a lot of other reasons for us. So we do have a lot of critters at night trying to get into that area. but our coop is very secure, and that's why we made it so secure, because we don't want anything getting in there at night. So that's just something you need to consider.
Chickens will sometimes eat their own eggs. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the times that that's happened to me, it's been when I have been lax on giving them, calcium or something. But once they start eating them, then they kind of learn to do it and they can teach other chickens to do it. So what I do is I will keep a couple fake eggs. They're just ceramic eggs in the nesting boxes, and that's unsatisfying for them when they try to peck through that, or they try to throw it out of the nesting box to crack it. And that has actually helped for me.
Hens like to go broody in the spring and summer occasionally, and this is also very breed dependent. So it's random. Like 2 of our chickens are broody right now, and they have been for the last like 2 weeks. No matter what I do, it's not breaking it, so I just let them be. It's whatever. They're just not laying for a while. They will so going broody means that they're trying to hatch eggs. They want to be a mama chicken, and they get really grumpy. Mine, I don't know if it's because they're just so well socialized with us, but mine are not like mean to me. I've seen other people's chickens will literally like attack their hands if they try to collect eggs, but mine just kind of grumble and like open their mouth and like hiss at me, but I can still get the eggs from under them if there's any under there.
I also have 2 broody hens right now. And yeah, every time I go to, pull that nesting box out, I'm like, please don't bite my thumb. Please don't bite my thumb. Because there's no way for me to get in there without like making my hands kind of vulnerable. And they haven't. They've actually been like decently nice to me. But I keep trying to, take them out of the nesting box, trying to break them every time that I walk by it. And they're just not breaking. So I don't know what I'm going to do about it.
Some signs that they're broody are their neck feathers will like stand up kind of. They get like really puffy and they make more dinosaur noises than usual. And then they'll open their little
Yeah.
mouths up and they get really grumpy and they kind of like growl at you. Mine don't try to like majorly bite me or anything. They don't get me, but they definitely are not happy that I'm sticking my hands in there.
Yeah, and if you're still not sure, you can kind of offer them an egg. Like, don't tuck it up underneath them, but like put it next to them. And if they take their beak and they scoot it under them to keep it warm, then they're broody. If you have new chickens, 1 or 2 new chickens or a whole flock of chickens that you're trying to integrate, that should either be done at night, pretty much while they're sleeping, so that they wake up together, or you should set them up so that they can see each other, kind of get used to each other without being able to like touch, so that they can't get into fights. I mean, you would do a similar thing if you were integrating, 2 cats or 2 dogs. It's not all that different from other animals, but if you just throw them in together without really doing any sort of preparation, then things might get violent. Chickens are not the most peaceful of creatures.
No, that really messes with their pecking order. They have to reestablish it, especially if there's roosters in the mix. And then we kind of mentioned this one earlier, but whenever you do get new birds, if they are coming onto your property for the first time, whether they're chicks or they're older hens or roosters or whatever, you want to quarantine them for a while and make sure that everything's good to go with them. They're not going to pass on any diseases or whatnot to your other chickens.
If you ever find an egg and you're not sure if it's good or bad, for example, you find a clutch of eggs that a chicken's been hiding somewhere, and you don't want to crack it open, play that game, and risk it being really bad and then suffering the consequences, you can put it in a glass of water to figure out whether it's good or bad. If it's a good egg, it will sink to the bottom. If it's a bad egg, that means there's gases that have built up inside that eggshell. It's going to make it float. And if it sinks, but it, kind of tips up on one end, that means it's still good. You can still eat it, but eat it fast.
So this is something that I don't really like to think about, but it is good to plan for. You want to have an idea or a plan for what to do when a chicken passes away or once they get older, or if something happens to them. You want to know what you're going to do with it at that point. Are you going to bury it? Are you going to go put it in the woods and let nature take its course? And then on the flip side of that, you also want to kind of have a plan for what you're going to do if it comes to a point where you need to put a chicken down. Like if there's something happening with it that like isn't fixable, isn't going to heal itself, isn't going to, or doesn't justify a vet trip or something, and you need to put it down. That's not fun to think about, but it's important.
Yeah, I've had to do that where the chicken wasn't going to get better, and it was a question of, do you do the humane thing and make it happen faster with less pain, or do you chicken out and let nature take its course? But I was not trying to make a callous joke, I swear. But it's putting a chicken down can be the kinder thing sometimes. What is your plan for chickens when they pass? What do you do with them?
We have had to deal with 2 bird deaths. One was a duckling the first week we got it, that passed away, and then the hen that randomly just died for no reason. And with both of those, we buried them. We just dug a very deep hole out on the property, somewhere that we know we're not going to be excavating in the next couple of years, and we put, I think, chunk, like a big like log, like piece of wood that we were splitting for firewood down in the hole, and then buried it, and then put rock on top of it so that things don't bury it up or dig it up, because we do have a lot of critters here that will do that, including Ricky and dogs that come to our property for no reason. What do you do?
I used to bury them next to trees that I had, so that, it was a good way to make respectful use of their body. But I've gotten to the point now where I actually just compost them. Some people say don't compost meat, but putting it in the compost pile and then putting a bunch of, brown material or carbon in there, it's easier. And I don't know, I feel like it's more directly reused beneficially, I guess.
So in my mind, the burying is easier because Taylor digs the hole.
Yeah, I don't have a man to dig my holes, okay, Mickayla?
But I feel like if we were to do that with the compost, then the skunk and or the possum that visit our compost pile every night would just pull it out, and then there would be chaos to deal with the next day all over the place. And I don't want to have to deal with that, because that would be my problem. So I'm just going to let Taylor dig a hole.
And chickens are not the only poultry that you can keep for eggs. We're not going to get into too many details, but just so that you're aware, you can also keep animals like ducks or quail if you want eggs, but maybe chickens don't work for you, or maybe chicken eggs just don't agree with you. That's the case for some people. If you're going to do ducks, you should just know that they do absolutely need access to water. But a cool thing about ducks is that they do tend to lay more eggs than chickens do, and they actually don't slow down as much in the winter. So maybe, those reasons are attractive to you. Quail are great for really small spaces, or if you need to be kind of inconspicuous or sneaky with your animal husbandry, because maybe you have something like an HOA. They are really easy to keep without anybody really knowing that you have them. They do make sound, but they kind of sound like a wild bird. No one's going to be like, you have quail in your backyard. But the downside of them is that, they're tiny birds and they lay tiny eggs. So, it takes something like 4 quail eggs to be the same size as like 1 chicken egg. But they are fairly low maintenance animals, and maybe they work better for you.
If you want a little bit of information on quail in the meantime, before we can get to doing an episode on other poultry, go back and listen to our guest episode with Chrissy, because she kind of goes into her little setup with her quail and what she's done in the past with them. Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.